Welcome back to Inside the Synod. I'm Sebastian Gomes. Well, week 2 is officially underway, and the Synod Fathers and Delegates are back in their small language groups to discuss part 2 of the Instrumentum Laboris. The theme is the discernment of the family vocation. It looks at things like the divine pedagogy, conjugal love, and the concept of indissolubility. Now, an interesting logistical point to share with you that even though the small language groups are still focused on part 2 of the Instrumentum Laboris, the interventions that were given during the general congregations this past weekend are now focused on part 3. And the reason for that is that there were many more bishops who chose to make an intervention based on the issues that were raised in part 3 of that document. So we've already gotten through parts 1 and 2 in the big Synod Hall. Now we're hearing the bishop's interventions on part 3. And the reason for that is because that part of the Instrumentum Laboris deals with very practical and tangible issues. So it's certainly going to be fascinating to see how these discussions develop this week into next week. Now, an interesting development to share with you, 13 cardinals and bishops have purportedly written a letter expressing their concern over the procedures of this synod and the composition of the commission who has been appointed to write the final text for the synod. And at the press briefing today, we heard a little bit more on this story.
Well, it's one of those things that it's a letter sent to the Pope, but it was made public. We haven't had any confirmation that the Pope has received it. The letter is made public on certain blogs in different languages. We do know, however, that among the signatories, 2 who supposedly signed it said they did not sign it. So Cardinal André Ventois, one of the presidents of the Synod, said he did not sign it, and Cardinal Angelo Scola, the Archbishop of Milan, did not sign it. It's one of those things that happens in many different circumstances where people revert to the public forum to address issues like that. I'm not saying that the contents are not important, but nevertheless, a letter has, and we don't have any other news about it.
We've had the opportunity to speak to a number of Synod Fathers over the past few days inside the Synod, and here now are a few more of those interviews.
What I talked about, in the light of everything we have heard so far, was the relationship of both the Church's teaching and the Church's sacramental ministry of absolution and bringing the person back to the fullness of the faith. You know, the teaching of the Church always has to be done in the most full and rich manner. It's the task of the priest, it's the task of the bishop to present the fullness of the teaching. But then we have a second responsibility, and that is recognizing that none of us live up to the fullness of the teaching. So we have to be there with God's mercy. That's why we have the sacraments of healing, to make sure that we all have that richness of mercy as we struggle to attain the fullness of the teaching.
It's been really interesting to listen to all the interventions, mostly from the bishops in the first few days, but then being broken up into the different small groups. That too really gives us an opportunity for all of us to say what we think about all the different sections in the Instrumentum Laboris, working on the document. And I think the way that the small group system has been expanded has been, because this didn't happen before so much, I think the small group makes, especially the auditors and the married couples, feel as if they're really able to have input.
We are very much still to keep the old cultures regarding the family, and at least 90% of our families are very, very stable, and there's a lot of respect still in the family for the parents, for the adults, and even of the aged. You know, it's a treasure for them. For us, in our own context, of course, we do not hear much of our gay marriage or temporary living, and it's still the values of the families are still there.
And that's all for this episode of Inside the Synod. Just to note that tomorrow we will be off because the small language groups are continuing their work and there are no general congregations, but we will have perspectives, so please tune into that, and then we'll be back with Inside the Synod on Wednesday. A very happy Thanksgiving to you all across Canada. For Salt and Light Television, I'm Sebastian Gomes in Rome.